All right, so are you ready to jump into this whole Stephanie Harlowe thing?
Yeah.
Because it's a lot. We're talking about whether she actually quit Crime Weekly. And let me tell you, it is so much more complicated than just, a simple yes or no.
Yeah, way more going on here.
There's a lot of buzz, a lot of speculation, and for good reason. I mean, we can't talk about this without addressing the elephant in the room.
Yeah.
The news about Stephanie's estranged husband, Adam.
Right. Is passing away. And I think that's a critical point. We really can't ignore that aspect of it.
No.
Because it adds a whole other dimension to how the public is reacting to all of this. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. It's impossible to separate the personal from the professional here.
Yeah.
Right. So let's get into the facts, like what we actually know. We've got Derrick Levasseur, Stephanie's co-host on Crime Weekly, former detective himself.
Right.
He made a video announcement, and it's really got people talking. And one of the things that really stuck out was the word he used to describe the Harlowe's divorce: tumultuous.
Interesting word choice. Tumultuous, yeah.
Which, to me, that kind of hints at something, I don't know, a little more, maybe a lot more complicated than just your average, we're getting a divorce kind of situation.
It definitely suggests, that there were complexities there that maybe we don't know about, yeah.
Right. And it gets more, I don't want to say juicy, because that's not the right word here, but it gets more layered.
Yeah.
Because he mentions that there was information about the divorce and that it actually went public. Some of it even ended up on YouTube.
Wow.
So it's like...
So this wasn't just a private matter. It was already, even before,
Exactly.
Before Adam's passing, there was already that public scrutiny happening.
Okay, so we've got layers here. And that context is really important to keep in mind, don't you think?
Mm-hmm.
Because it explains why the fan reactions, oh boy, they've been all over the place.
Yeah, and it makes sense in a way. On the one hand, you've got those who are expressing, their sympathy, their support, which makes total sense, right? It's a sad situation. But then you've got the other side of the coin. You've got people who are, well, let's just say a little less forgiving.
Because, there's that whole idea, isn't there? That, and I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but there's that idea that if you choose to work in this world, in the true crime world, you're playing by a different set of rules. Like, you're putting yourself out there talking about other people's tragedies.
Yeah.
So it's almost like...
So you'd better be prepared to have your own life examined under a microscope, too. I don't know. It's a lot to unpack.
It's that saying, right? Like, live by the sword, die by the sword. Some people seem to think that applies here. And then on top of that, just to add fuel to the fire, you've got those accusations of gaslighting, right? With some people claiming that, Stephanie was controlling the narrative around their relationship.
Oh, yeah, that's a whole other can of worms. It is. And it's important to remember that, those are accusations,
right? Not
confirmed facts. We have to make that distinction.
Absolutely. Crucial distinction. But still, it just goes to show how quickly things can get, spun out of control online.
Right.
Especially when you have a mix of grief, speculation, and true crime fandom all colliding at once.
Yeah.
Like a recipe for chaos.
Yeah.
But I do want to, before we get too far down that road, I want to loop back to Stephanie's statement. Because she did release one, right?
Yeah, she did.
So how did that play into all of this?
Well, it's really interesting because her statement focuses mainly, almost entirely, on her grief and her children, which, anyone can understand that. If I were in her position, that's where my head would be too.
Absolutely. 100%. But there's always a but.
There is. And it's the elephant in the room, isn't it? It's what she doesn't say. Stephanie's incredibly vague about what she plans to do with Crime Weekly, about the future. And naturally, that just fuels the fire even more.
It's like she's got these episodes, right? They're recorded, ready to go. But can you imagine? I can't even fathom having that content, knowing it's there, but also dealing with, such a personal loss. It's like, what do you even do with that?
And it really brings up the interesting dynamic we see with true crime,
Yeah.
The creators are inviting us in, sharing these often really dark, really difficult stories.
Right.
And we, as listeners, we connect with them as hosts, almost
like... personal level, almost.
Exactly. Like, we know them. And then something like this happens, something so real, so raw. And it forces everyone to take a step back and acknowledge that line.
That line between the show and real life, right?
Yeah,
because
exactly.
It's like, we think we know these podcast hosts. We feel like they're our friends.
Mm-hmm.
But then something like this happens. And it's like, oh, right, we're really just listeners.
Yeah, and that can be a hard pill to swallow for some people.
Oh, for sure.
Because then it brings up all those questions of like, how much access are we entitled to? Should Stephanie be expected to just power through, share her grief, keep the content coming? Or is it okay for her to say, you know what, I need to step back, my healing, my family, that comes first?
And that's where things get really interesting, don't they?
They do. Because there's no right answer, is there?
No, not at all.
It's so personal.
It really is.
And it makes you think about these online platforms,
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Because on the one hand, you see this incredible outpouring of support from fans, which, in a difficult time, that can be so, so meaningful. But then
there's the other side.
There's the flip side,
yeah,
where that same online space becomes a breeding ground for judgment and speculation.
And you just never know which side of it you're going to get.
I think it's a double-edged sword, that's for sure.
Reminds me of other cases we've seen, where online communities can be both incredibly supportive and incredibly cruel. Sometimes at the same time, it's weird.
Absolutely. It's that anonymity, I think, that brings out both the best and the worst in people.
Totally. But I do think in this situation, it makes Stephanie's need for privacy, it makes it completely understandable.
Oh, absolutely. Regardless of how you feel about everything else, I think we can all agree on that.
For sure. 100%. Yep. Okay. So to circle back, because I know we started this whole deep dive with a question, right?
We did. The $1 million question.
Did Stephanie Harlowe quit Crime Weekly? What's the verdict? Have we reached one?
It's tough to say, isn't it? I mean, it's not like a clear-cut case, Yeah. We've got Derrick's statement. We've got what the fans are saying, Stephanie's own words. But there's still that ambiguity there.
So it's less about finding the definitive answer.
Yes.
And more about understanding, like, the layers of it all.
Exactly. And recognizing that sometimes the most important thing isn't the answer itself, but the questions that come up along the way.
It really does make you think. I mean, we come to true crime, right?
Yeah.
For the mystery, the drama, all of that.
Of course, of course.
But so often it's like it's the human side of it all that really sticks with you.
Absolutely. And in this case, I mean, you can't get away from it, can you? You've got Stephanie, her kids, dealing with this just awful loss. And they're doing it, let's not forget, with this very public spotlight on them.
Right, right.
And then you've got Derrick trying to, keep things going with the show, be there for Stephanie, but also acknowledging, that this thing happened. And then the fans, I mean, they're trying to figure out what to even feel,
Yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot of layers. And it makes you wonder, like, where do we even go from here?
It's a question, isn't it?
When does true crime, like the entertainment part of it, when does it bump up against real tragedy? And what are we even supposed to do with that? I don't know if there's an easy answer.
It's a tough one, for sure. And that actually, it makes me think about something as we kind of, wrap up this deep dive.
Okay, yeah, what's that?
How do we, as those who are, let's be honest, really into true crime, right? How do we square that interest, that fascination, with knowing that at the heart of it all, these are real people going through some really heavy stuff?
It's like finding that balance, I guess, between wanting to know more, but also being empathetic.
Yeah.
Right? Remember that these aren't just stories. These are people's lives.
That's exactly it. And sometimes, unlike our favorite true crime shows, real life doesn't tie everything up in a nice, neat bow at the end.
I guess that's true. Sometimes the answers, well, you got to kind of figure them out for yourself. This whole thing, it's given us a lot to think about. And until we hear more about Stephanie, about what's happening with Crime Weekly, I think the best thing we can do is just, be mindful of their situation and others like it. It's a good reminder to lead with, like, kindness and all that.
Couldn't agree more.
Well, thanks for joining us for this deep dive, everybody. It's been a lot, hasn't it? But we'll be back soon with another one. New case, new story, whole new perspective. Until then, stay curious out there, keep asking those questions, and as always, thanks for taking the deep dive with us.